Alrighty, so we've passed week 15 and we're moving into week 17 of the content. But as we know, the weeks are a little off because of the changes that I've made to the schedule. Okay, so our next code up is the next section of the Udemy course. And to learn together, I'm going to show you an example of what I want you to submit. But before I do that, in week 15, if you remember, I said we're going to have to figure out how we're going to handle the fact that in the Udemy course, Andrew shows the user and the task when he's creating his API. And there's really there's no relationship by the end of the section that we finish. Okay, and I'm going to scroll up here. By the end of the section that we're going to finish, there's still not going to be any relationship between the users and the task. Okay. Now there are several of you, actually I figured this out today. I think almost half of you, let me walk through that in my head to make sure. No, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. So half of you are actually most likely, because you've already told me, most of you, that you're going to end up doing the security. Okay. And in that security section, there's going to be a place down here. And the reason I'm pointing it out is in lecture 114, where he actually walks through how to create the relationship between the user and the task. And he does it in such a way that we can't just take that piece for those of you not doing the security authentication piece. So I've given quite a bit of thought to this, how we're going to handle this for everyone else who probably not, at least by the end of the class, but I hope eventually may come back and look at this authentication for their particular content. But because of that, we need to figure out a way for you to get this API done. And so anyway, that's first. I hope that makes sense. If not, I'm actually going to give you an example, because for those of you not doing the authentication, which is half of you, right? I'm harping back and thinking about what I did for the develop one. And really remember what we all did is we created a flat file. And in that case, there wasn't a user, there wasn't two files that you had users in one or whatever you called it, and then your what I would consider your transaction data in the other one. So I thought, you know what? Then let's just allow you, and I'm going to give you an example of how I did this. I will tell you my hope is that I actually get through the next section of authentication and change my data to be this. But here's what I want you to know before I show you the example, is that what Andrew's going to do is basically called referencing, to where he's going to reference in one collection the other collections, so that those users, right? Those users can only, because they're authenticating, only when they create, it's only for them. So that's what creates that relationship, is referencing. And the other way you could do it is just embedding it. But in order to do embedding it, we'd have to change some of the ways you've been taught. And even to do referencing, you would have to have gotten all the way through the authentication. So what you can do, and last week I had you all create in our Learn Together, right, what your database was going to look like. So this week I actually want you to do the following, which is actually lay out the routes that you're going to create. And I'll show you what I want for the output in a second. But in doing this, it was going to make you actually think about how the data is going to go in. And if you're doing it without doing authentication, you're more than welcome to do only one collection. I want to see probably a few more fields, right? Then, and again, that I think most of you actually had enough. I think I said more than 5, and actually, even in my database example, I'm going to need to add a few more. I kind of just got the basics done so I could give you an example of how, in my case, I could use just one collection to still do the kind of processing that I wanted to do with my data. But each of you have a different target or a different functionality because, and let me be clear about this, is that in the course when he added task, right, he added data and he really didn't do any besides the validation and sanitization, which is good. He really just added the data to the collection. In my case, I'm going to do some processing, some verification, not validation, but verification of the information before I write to the database. And I'm actually going to create a route that actually gives some information just to the user based on the data that's in the collection. Okay. So let me give you the example now. So I don't know if you remember my dev one was based on the idea of an open ledger, right? So I'm actually going to move over to, right now I don't have anything in the database. I'm going to move over to Postman and show you. So I have right now, and I have more work to do, but I at least have a start here, is that I have a route that is an opening transaction, right? So I create new members. So it's an opening transaction. And so then that creates that transaction. And if I try, and here's part of the logic, if I try to do that again, it'll tell me my member is already set up, so I can't do it. So it only allows me, which makes sense, right? So if you have a sender of O, that's your opening balance. And this is the amount of coin that you have, right? So I'm going to create at least 2 right here. And so now if I want to list those members, now in this case, I actually got to do a little more work here, but you get the idea, is that I have 2 members. Now again, this is all just one model, and I'll show you the model in a second. So now if I want to actually post transactions, right? So I have Seabird and R. Waller, right? So if I say R. Waller is going to send to Seabird, $1, right? Or real coin, right? So it's a crypto idea, right? So good. So that's good. So that worked, no problem, right? So actually in my output of my console, this is something I'm going to work on. I actually do some verification, and I just output some numbers in this case to show, right, that transaction was fine. And then I could do like another transaction, like I could come back. This time, let me do a transaction that is a little more, so let me scroll back up here and then do a $50, right? So and actually, that's the other thing is if I do, and let's actually try to send that, see if that works, right? So the sender doesn't have enough real coin to complete the transaction. Because what I'm doing there is I'm verifying the balance on the account before it is actually saved to the database. So $50 would work, no problem, right? So that's the logic I have built in. Now, at this point, I've just written this into the route, but I'm going to actually abstract this into another function because that balance is one I want to call on another route. But what I want you, okay, so now having just kind of seen, and I'll show you my model as well. So again, in my case, I'm doing the basic one. I have a route. I would want to add a little more information, like date is probably something important, and something else I'm going to come up with. But at this point, I just did the minimum to show you an example. But what I want you to do here is I want you to create in the public a README file that does this. It goes over your routes, right? So I show the route I give what you have to provide for that route. And besides validation and sanitization, I talk about what logic I'm doing before I post, right? Now, if you're not doing any logic and you're just posting it, then what you could do is have another route that may actually just give information. I'll show you an example of that in a minute, right? And so like this one will just list all the opening transactions for new members. And this one is the transaction where I showed you. I have a sender and a receiver and an amount. And before this one gets posted, I again do determine a balance for the does the sender have an opening transaction, and what is their balance? Okay, and I compare that against the amount that is being requested for the particular transaction amount. And then if it's not enough, I send a message. The only thing I have to add there is I actually just need to validate the receiver, and I think I haven't done that yet. But also the other thing, so that's probably my most involved code so far that I've done with this example. And then I'm going to do another route, which is transaction, and then I'm going to show member. But I think I actually might end up changing this route name to just maybe BAL for balance, because even though we're doing CRUD operations for these, that's what we've learned. I want you to see that you can, in addition to doing CRUD operations, you can also just give information back. Because think about the next logical step. Yes, would be authentication, but it would also be that you're sending back some kind of information to the user, like the user, if they were the person looking for what's my balance, right? You would want a way to show them, in my example, what that balance was and a list of the transactions that they've had. So this is what I want you to think about for this assignment, okay? All right, so I hope maybe it doesn't, right? But I hope it may give you an idea of, for those of you not continuing on, or going to be not doing the authentication, which again is about half of you, what you can do to complete creating your API, because most of you who I've talked to, you do have some kind of user information, and because we don't relate these collections, and he doesn't do this, and I've shown you, I've talked a little about what I mean by you can either embed them or you can reference it, or in our case, we're just going to create we're simulating the idea of a flat file, even though it's in a collection, a database collection. So having said that, those of you, just want to say this, is that after next week, and I will go over as much of the code up as I can next week. Okay, and next week would be a great night for those, and again, coming into the office hours or making sure you understand, because after next week, then I'm gone for a week, which is really where we have our last code up, right? And then that last, so anyway, to be clear, after this is next week, where we'll take another about 6 or 7 lectures, and then you'll finish it up here. But next week, I'm going to cover we'll talk about the concepts that is in the final part of this, because several of you have already moved ahead. And then this week will really be for you to work on your Dev 5, okay? So, but because this week is the week I'm going to be at Google this week. So you'll still have some work to do. I will probably do a learn together that you just post like your progress and something like that. We'll have a week. Again, you don't have to wait, because the sooner you finish this and you start working on it, the more time you and I will have to talk about this. But this will be the final, right, this night, and I will have a schedule up before I head out if you want to already think about, when you're going to sign up. But again, do it sooner if you can. That way you have more lead time to fix anything. So this is my plan as of now. If you have questions, please reach out to me. Come into class. Next Wednesday night's a great night to get clarification, but questions and reply to here. But what I want to see in addition to any questions, clarifications, is that file that I was talking about where you actually lay out your routes, right? And I haven't said at this point how many you need for sure, but most likely it's all the CRUD operations. And then I want to see some kind of either output where you have a route that just outputs some information, or what I showed was some kind of logic before I wrote to the database. So you can, if, depending on your data, you'll have, and this is something you and I really, it might help if you sit down and have a conversation with me. Now that I've shown you what I'm looking for this week and shown you an example, for you and I to get clear on, does what you're attempting to do meet the requirements for this last develop at 5? And the reason I say that is it's way important, and it's going to count for 2 of your devs, right? So making sure you have that would be a really important thing. Okay. All right. So I'm gone this week. Next, I think I've said enough. So have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon.